Right. Good evening, everybody. And thank you very much indeed for coming. It's a very exciting evening. Despite that, I need to start with a few traditional announcements. Firstly, in the event of fire, we'll all run out through that door there. And we're meant to meet at the front of King's Walk where the old fountain used to be. So there's that exit there and that exit over there. There is no fire alarm planned and no planned fire either. In terms of a quick data protection announcement, we are filming the presentation. Now the camera is aiming at the person doing the presentation. It's not aiming at the audience. And we will be recording it and making it available to people on the council website and YouTube. If you're uncomfortable being recorded, please let us know. We will also, if you ask questions so that the audio ends up on the video, there will be a microphone as well so that gets recorded and people watching it who can't be here this evening can understand what's said. So, as I said, so my name is Martin Todd. I am leader of Winchester City Council, and I'm also responsible for the council's regeneration project. And as I said, it's a very exciting day. Most of us here today have the good fortune to live and work in a really special city, a city we love and care about deeply. But as we've known for a long time, there's a central section of our city that's not quite as special, that needs transformation, the Central Winchester Regeneration area. Tired buildings, bleak public realm, poor connections, it's a huge opportunity. And for several years, the council has been on the journey to sort that out. The assembly of the site, the careful work to create the Central Winchester SPD. The Central Winchester project is our chance to transform this area, bringing homes for local families, jobs for local people, while sensitively reflecting its setting and our city's heritage, and giving the opportunity to develop our city for the future, taking on the challenges faced by new generations and responding to the challenge of climate change. The council decided at a full council meeting a year ago that the next stage, the next step to transform this area was partnership. We weren't going to wash our hands of the central area, rely solely on the SPD and flog off the site to the highest bidder. And we weren't going to pretend that we could assemble the skills and the finance to regenerate the site in-house. We needed a partner to make it happen. We set out a challenging brief. We asked potential partners to tell us their approach to delivering a mixed-use regeneration of the area, how they would deliver the SPD, to tell us about their approaches to the public realm, placemaking, engagement, sustainability, meanwhile uses, yes, and even archaeology. We asked about their team, the partners they would bring on board, their financial standing, and their experience, and the experience of their partners in delivering all those things. And we had a great response. 13 applicants shortlisted to 3. And after a year's careful work that included visits to sites previously developed by potential partners and a rigorous evaluation process against all those criteria advised by outside experts and more, 2 weeks ago, the council made a choice. And then we couldn't tell anyone about it for 2 long weeks. But this evening, we can. I'm pleased to tell you that we've chosen a partner who has demonstrated that they get what we want, what matters to people locally, what's special about our city that has to be reflected in any plans, but also understands the real desire of local people to see this area sorted out, who is committed to working with us, with you, and with the wider community of Winchester, and has the team, the expertise, the track record, the resources, the sensitivity, the vision, and the commitment to make it happen. So Winchester City Council has chosen the Jigsaw Consortium, trading as Partnership and Places, a partnership between Generate Kajima Regeneration Limited and PFP Iglo, which for those of you who are not in the property industry may not mean very much right now. But by the end of this evening's presentation, it will mean a great deal more. Tonight's meeting is hugely important, not just because of the decision the council has made or the content you're about to hear, but because it's the start of a relationship between Jigsaw, the City Council and the people of Winchester, which is going to transform the Central Winchester Regeneration area. And now I'm going to hand over to Tamsin Trail to introduce Jigsaw and the wider team presenting tonight. Tamsin.
Hi, good evening everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Tamsin Trail. I am the Regeneration Director for the Jigsaw Consortium, and I'm joined by various colleagues in the room tonight, so apologies if we haven't met yet, but hopefully we will through the course of the evening. I'm just here to say how excited we are to be working on this opportunity. We're really honoured to have been chosen, and it's been a difficult process to get here because the council really has put us through actually looking at what our approach is and making sure that we can really kind of come along and do justice to what is a really exceptional opportunity. So just to build on Councillor Todd's background to who we are, as mentioned, we are a partnership of two existing joint ventures, Generate Kojima Regeneration Limited and PFP Igloo. We have come together to form Jigsaw. Now we met, actually we were saying, in this room at nearly a year ago, and we came together and realised that between us we had skills that actually came together to create something really special that we felt would do justice to Winchester. And so that's why we've come together today. And I'm actually going to pass over to the rest of the team to talk you through our experience, a bit on our approach, and yeah, take you through what we're going to get up to over the next few months. So I'm going to hand over to John Long from the Jigsaw team.
Thank you, Tamsin. Hello, good evening. I just wanted to say two things, really. Two things by way of providing assurance to the people in this room, the people who've come out and made an effort to be part of this occasion this evening. Apart from the fact that our normal day names were a bit of a mouthful, the Jigsaw name came about because it really does reflect how we work together, how these two teams have come together to complement each other and to form a bigger picture, to bring the expertise and the money and the expertise that we need to deliver a scheme of this nature. We've really enjoyed getting to know each other. It was a year ago that we were in this room, and you know, we met each other and we've worked with each other. We decided to join forces because we felt we could do justice to the project by teaming up. Over that time, we've become good colleagues and good friends. It's been a pleasure working with each other, and I hope, as you'll see the excitement as we hand over to John in a minute, as you see the sort of things we've been thinking about, I hope the excitement and the passion will come across. I'm sure it will. And we're so pleased with the way the relationships work so far that we are already beginning to explore other opportunities. We see this relationship as this partnership as being something very much for the long term. But the important thing about the partnership is it was born for Winchester. We have formed to do this very project in this city. The second thing I say is that we recognise the privilege and the responsibility of working in an historic city such as Winchester. We are just a blip on the timeline of this city, and we understand that what we leave here has to be a lasting legacy that we'll all be proud of. And again, it relates to that concept of the jigsaw. There's one particular piece of the city, for the time being, that a lot of attention is being focused on. But we do recognise that there's a bigger picture that we have to fit into. And so we'll do our best to work for you, to work for this city, and to get this right. And we won't stop until we do.
Thanks. Is this working? Yeah. Thanks, John. I'm another John, and before we say stand up, I am actually standing up. Sort of fate dealt me a blow at birth. Anyway, you're not going to see a scheme tonight because there isn't one. We were very clear through the bidding process that actually it was our approach. So really what I'm trying to do today is explain to you how we respond to what you've given us. You've given us so much to work with in the form of the SPD. And I imagine a lot of people in this room worked really hard on that SPD, and we recognise its importance. So what I want to do is remind you, as I'm sure it might be burnt on the brains of some of you already, the 9 themes that came out. And then what I want to try and do is show our work in relation to these 9 themes and how I think we want to respond to them, stand on the shoulders of that work and move forwards. So in terms of vibrant mixed-use quarter, what you can see on the screen here is a selection of our projects. I don't think we've done a project like this project because this place is unique, as all places are unique. So you'll see in the press or you'll look at projects and you think, oh, we don't want that. It's like, but the projects we've done elsewhere were done for those particular places. But I think there's elements within these schemes which sort of give an indication of how we go about doing things. So on the screen here, you can see our scheme in Newcastle in the Mailings, which is this image here, which is a housing scheme which won a Housing Design Award back in 2016, which was a really unique piece of townscape urban making. We wanted to come up with individual homes and stacked maisonettes. We don't like doing big blocks of apartments, for example, and we think that kind of granular approach to placemaking is really important and particularly relevant to Winchester. And we ended up with some really unique typologies here, which included actually a 5-storey townhouse which had 1 room per floor. Everybody said, you're mad, but they all sold and the people who live in them are absolutely delighted and really happy, and it's a great place to live, and we're really proud of it. And then we're also doing schemes in another scheme in Newcastle called the Stevenson Quarter, which is where Stevenson designed and built the first steam engines to travel on the Darlington line. And what we're doing there is sensitively restoring the pattern shop into creative workspace with the City Council as a joint venture and a new build office building. So we're very used to working with what's already here, and we know that although that's only a couple of 100 years worth of history, you've got 2,000 years worth and there's lots to go at. We're really sort of relishing the opportunity to sort of get under the skin of Winchester and work in it. We're going to introduce our design team through the course of this project, through the course of this presentation. But I can sort of give glimpses of it here. So this is an individual home by Peter Barber, and Peter Barber is one of the, I think he's probably the best housing architect working in the UK at the moment, and he's a part of our team, and we're really excited because he does something, I think people call it sort of modern Dickensianism, if you like. It's kind of a gentle density of low-rise, dense housing, which we think is really suitable for Winchester. It's not, again, as I said before, large blocks of housing. And we think there are opportunities for unique moments throughout the scheme, and we'd love to also start engaging some of the younger, smaller practices within Winchester to actually help us on this journey as well. So we don't see the team we've got as finite. We think actually there's a really great opportunity to bring local talent into the team. Carl is here and he'll answer lots of questions that I'm sure you'll have later around engagement and meanwhile use and activation. And Carl is kind of the king of this stuff, and this is one of his schemes in Hackney, where basically what he's done is created a temporary and meanwhile use on a site that will last sort of 5 to 10 years, which actually starts to create an energy in a place where perhaps traditional building economics don't quite stack up. Now for us, what's the relevance to Winchester? Well, you know, we want to find and nurture and help small businesses establish themselves. We want to create creative workspace. We think that's likely to be a refurbishment of the existing King's Walk building. I'm sure some of you would love to see it go, but actually in the new climate crisis we have, you know, embodied carbon and existing buildings are really important to refurbish, but they need to start somewhere. So then maybe they start somewhere like this and then migrate into other aspects of the building, of the scheme. And so that's a way in which we can sort of build this vibrancy, because it's not just happens the moment we get practical completion on the scheme, it actually starts now. And in fact, it has been happening already, because Carl was actually involved with Worthwhile Works when they were looking at King's Walk. And I think already we can see the massive change that's happened around here with the work at King's Walk, and the work that Wendy and Neil have done with Worthwhile Works around making it a really vibrant little corner already of Winchester. We know it could be so much better on top of that in bringing the skills that we have. The next theme was exceptional public realm. And I think we can all agree that this is the kind of glue that holds the whole thing together. And what we know is that Winchester, not only is the buildings made up of many parts over history, actually its public realm is also many kinds of spaces which were appropriate for different times in history, which have left their mark on the city and the pattern. And so some of these projects are ours, some are actually reference projects, if I'm honest. But really the slide sort of shows perhaps the difference between sort of east and west and what you might find around here in terms of a sort of harder townscape, you know, spaces that are multifunctional. How can we bring water back into the spaces where it might be difficult to get to the actual water underground because we've got lots of services and other things happening there, which we know about, through to, you know, as you move further towards the river and the other half of the site, how we might turn that into something more bucolic and open out the waterway and actually engage the water and create this sort of riverside housing offer that we think could be a really amazing place to live, visit, spend time, walk through, and make it much more attractive, you know, as a place to walk through rather than seen as the kind of end of the city. We think actually there's a real opportunity to, you know, encourage permeability through the site and to connect to the wider Winchester and Winnell and beyond. And then critically, and I think, you know, everybody in this room has probably got a story to tell around housing and the issues and somebody who can't afford to live here, or people who've moved away, or people who are trying to move here and they can't find the right kind of accommodation. So again, I think I've spoken a little bit about this, but lots of different kinds of housing. So we're not a house builder. You know, we don't have a product, we don't have a thing, and we just want to come and drop it down on the site and say done. We want to listen and work with you and understand the kind of housing need and what that offer could be and what kind of tenure. You know, do we want to sell it? Do we want to rent it? You know, what level of affordability do we need to be offering? Is it true affordable housing, or actually is it some kind of discount market rent? And actually as a team, we've got all of the different expertise to be delivering this. But I think fundamentally, and you'll find a lot of developers are sort of scared of operational things, you know, the life of beyond the bricks and mortar, is we're here for the long term. So we're very used to operating and running housing. And so therefore we see that there's a great opportunity to not only provide the bricks and mortar, but the services that go alongside making this a really fantastic place to live. The mailings I've already spoken about, but this shows another aspect of it, which is how you sort of deal with the gardens in a way that actually, rather than building big high fences, they're actually kept quite low to encourage social interaction and togetherness in the scheme. This is another scheme of Peter Barber's in London, actually next to a very busy road. I mean, in the future, we hope Friarsgate isn't a very busy road, but it is a very busy road. And so how do you create sort of sanctuary using built form? This is a scheme we're doing for Nationwide. You know, the first housing they built for years. You know, if you think about it, the building societies were house builders. And this is a not-for-profit scheme. We're working with them on that. And then this is actually a sort of unique little project of 6 homes, which Simon Henley of Henley Hale Brown, and Simon lives in Winchester and he's our lead master planner on the project. But that's actually a project he did for 6 families to live together in a co-housing model. And we do see, although we won't commit to it necessarily here, but we do see that there could be quirky corners of the site where actually there's some unique opportunities where if people come forward and said, we would really like to live here, but we want something special, let's talk about it, because we don't have a plan yet. You know, we can do anything as long as we can make the numbers work, which I'm sure with the creativity that I've got in front of me here, and they'll probably kick me later, we can make that happen. On sustainability, and I know that a lot of you are interested in this, as are we, and actually Igloo, which is one of the businesses that I work for within the consortium, was one of the first environmentally and socially sustainable development companies set up 20 years ago. We're really passionate about this stuff, as are the rest of the team. And so the 2 themes within the SPD, climate change, sustainability, and sustainable transport, I don't think you can see them as separate, so we put them together on the slide. And some of the words that are in the SPD around local renewable energy, green transport, climate resilience, low upfront carbon in materials are kind of really important. But kind of what does that mean? I think sometimes these words are floated around. It's like, okay, that sounds great, but what does it actually mean? And so the next slide is, for me, what I think they mean. What it means is, and we're much more sensitive to this now because of the cost of energy, but we should have been aware of it all along. I mean, energy in some respects has been too cheap, but you know, people are struggling and we need to understand that. But it's about affordable and secure energy, and how can we deliver that on site. And we've done this in places like Trent Basin in Nottingham, where we provided a community energy strategy where actually we put PV on all of the roofs, but the energy storage, the battery, is a communal resource, and therefore it can be shared and much more economic. Similarly, in a lot of other schemes we're doing now, we're always putting battery storage in. So it's not just about selling it back to the grid, it's actually about storing it and holding it so that you can use it and you've actually got security over your own energy. I think healthy, active places, how do we get people out of cars? In a city like Winchester, which isn't just the urban centre, as you know, it's the wider conurbation. How do we get the buses working really brilliantly and seen as an attractive alternative to travelling into the city? How do we get people onto bikes? How do we make it more walkable? All of those things are absolutely critical. Future-proof places. So the resilience that this city needs, particularly around flood, is super important. I think it goes hand in hand with the desire to reconnect with the water and open up some of the waterways. We know that will help with the future-proofing and flood resilience of the city. So that's a really super positive thing. And we also know that it's a very easy win in terms of increased biodiversity. So, for us, it's like, we really want to embrace that. And the final one, the reduction in global warming, which is the embodied carbon piece, how we build and what do we make things of, and can we use the resources that are already here to build with? I think we have to sort of recognise that in Northern Europe we'll probably be okay. Like if it moves 3 degrees, there's people in Scotland who might be quite happy, right? But actually, we have a massive impact across the rest of the planet. And actually, our responsibility goes beyond, Winchester, goes beyond the UK, goes beyond Europe, goes beyond the Northern Hemisphere. Actually, we are displacing people across the world, and therefore, I think we have to take this really critically. And I actually do get quite emotional about the blindness of the industry not to recognise that that is something that we're doing to the planet. The final 3, I'm sure I'm sort of going to run horrendously. People did say 4 hours, yeah? No, okay, I'll try and speed up. Incremental delivery. So some developers are like, I want a nice big clear site, de-risk, and we can just crack on. Okay, that's not us anyway. Unfortunately, it's not this site, and it's not this city, and it's not the way in which you've written your SPD. For us, it's a fantastic opportunity to go slow. Think about it. I was saying to somebody earlier today, my father was a tool setter, and his philosophy was measure twice, cut once. And I think there's a real opportunity to sort of really think about it before we commit. And so the work that Carl does in terms of the meanwhile use, for example, gives us that opportunity to test. Doing the next set of archaeological pits, to see what's under the bus station. It's an opportunity to find things out. We know that our granular approach, and you can start seeing the architecture is made up of many small things, means if we find something there, we go and do some work over here instead. We can be nimble and thoughtful about it rather than just thinking, oh no, the whole project goes on hold, which would just be a complete disaster. And the N2 project's actually the mailings, which I obviously keep speaking about, I'm very proud of it, but also it's one that the council went to visit, so when you get to quiz them and us about it, they can speak with confidence. That scheme and the scheme in Sunderland, which I have been working on for the last 5 years, are both projects that we've delivered incrementally. So with the mailings, that was the first phase. We've then done Lower Steveburns Yard opposite. We've got Malmö Quay, we've got Spillers Wharf, we've got another site. There are a whole series of sites which have their own identities, which we've employed different design teams to do different things on. It's not like, oh, we've got one favourite designer and we've got an approach and we just keep doing more of it. It's actually, we did really well on the mailings, let's do something different. Because the people in the mailings don't want to feel like there's a second-rate version of what they've just bought now, opposite. They want something different, and I think that's that's something that we revel in. And in Sunderland, we're doing a 1,000-home master plan, which is basically trying to bring people back into living in a hollowed-out city centre in a sort of post-industrial landscape. It's a completely different setting in many respects to Winchester, but in a sense, the concerns and the passion of the local authority and the people is just the same, which is we're really passionate about our city. Actually, we're going to invest in it ourselves. We're going to build housing and we're going to hold them and rent them. And then when the values are there, we might then start to be able to attract other developers to come in and do more. So it's really fantastic to be working with local authorities who back themselves. And that's something we've got lots and lots of experience of. Community, I think sort of proof is in the pudding. One of Peter Barber's schemes, and the reason I like this particular image is it's a new scheme, but it's obviously in an existing place, and it's a sort of street party where, you know, it's not about us and them, is it? It's about actually how do you create places where, again, you know, people are welcomed and embraced, and actually you create sort of cohesive neighbourhoods. I think the route to do that, and this is me, running a co-creation workshop, and this is one of the things which we'll come on to later in this talk about how we work, which is how do we create a series of events and activities over probably the next 6 months where we build on the SPD, do some more deeper listening, get into some detail, maybe start to make some marks on paper and think about what kind of place do we want to create together. So when you see that plan or a master plan that we might produce, I've been told I'm allowed to use the word master plan today because there's lots of planners and architects in the room and they know what the word means. But actually to lay audiences, it can feel quite scary. It's like master plan. It's like they've got, like, we don't have one. Like, we've got some good thinkers and we've got some great people here and we've got a great team. But together, when we come up with a plan, it's a plan of actually how to make it happen. Not necessarily about how we want it to look, because we don't know yet. I mean, it's got to kind of, it's like slow cooking. You know, it's got to sort of come out through the process. And I guess, again, you know, there's not many architects who can sit down with their residents and not get lynched. So this is Peter with a resident on a scheme that he finished, sort of having a cup of tea and having a lovely time. So, you know, the fact he's still alive and he does lots of housing in difficult areas is kind of a testament to his skills and abilities, I guess. And the final one is, I guess it all comes together in this, you know, which perhaps isn't, it's something that we often in our line of work sort of maybe talk about as software, city experience. It's the soft stuff. So we can do bricks and mortar, we can, you know, create great places, we can think about how they connect to other places and what kind of things people want, but how does the activation work? And we know that actually just building good spaces and things doesn't automatically equal this. And we know that there needs to be other things that we need to do, helping find the right tenants to move in, you know, who've got fledgling businesses. So this guy is a baker who is actually in one of our schemes in Newcastle, and it's a startup business, and you know we create a community chest for the residents to spend how they want, so they can spend that on things, and we create, you know, very low rents or rent-free periods in order to try and get the right people in there and help and support them. This is a scheme of Carl's, which just shows the activation and the event planning that goes into it. This is Bermondsey Square, which is an igloo project, which actually is built on the site of the old Bermondsey Abbey, which Pre-Construct, who are our archaeologists we're involved with, who are also the archaeologists that we are working with in Winchester, and they have a base in Winchester, and Paul's been fantastic. Took some getting going. I mean, archaeologists sort of start with a bit like, well, there's not much to tell you really, and then before you know it, he's talking about, I got told off about this last night as well, leather. There's just leather in water down there, and there's all sorts of things you'll find, and because of the amazing waterways and things like that, it's just, there's a level of preservation of ordinary things, but because there's this amazing documentation of who lived here historically, actually, and when you find it, you actually know who this thing belonged to. And I think that's sort of incredible, and how we can sort of take those stories and actually build on them and create places that have real meaning connected to that history, I think is unique in the UK, because, you know, as somebody said to me today, I think it was Richard, was it's one of the most surveyed sort of places in Europe, so probably the world. So in a sense, that gives you a flavour, other than Winchesterness, which we're going to come on to, of 8 of the 9 SPD themes, and how I think our work can be interpreted within that framework, and what we want to kind of bring to the party. You've done a big chunk of the work with the SPD. We want to bring something to it. We want to move forward together. Our team, and I've mentioned some of them already, are Pre-Construct in terms of archaeology, Turner Works, who are architects and meanwhile specialists, and they'll also be running the engagement process. So if you want to know anything about how the next 6 months in terms of work with you guys is going to happen, you can talk to Carl about it. He's completely prepared for tonight. Bart Worm were our planning experts, East on landscape and townscape, and actually East are architects as well. And I think, again, we were very conscious of not going for a kind of let's say, what's the word, a sort of garden-led landscape approach. Actually, this is an urban environment. It needs a kind of a townscape approach. And for those of you who sort of remember people like Gordon Cullen, you know, in terms of placemaking and reading of the city and the compression and the opening of spaces and those long views and vistas, and I think it's much more in that world that we want to work with our landscape team rather than just necessarily what the plants are going in there, because actually it's so much more than that here. Henley Hale Brown in the middle there, our lead architect. Simon's lived in Winchester 15 years, and it's been pointed out to me that makes him a youngster, apparently. Anyway, he's here, he's on the ground, and I think there's an opportunity for us to open a project office here for his practice, but for the wider team. I can say that because he's not in the room right now, but he has committed to that. And Peter Barber, who I've spoken to you about, who is our sort of housing expert, if you like. We then work with a company called Expedition and Useful Projects. They're actually part of the same business, who are fantastic in terms of sustainability and circular economy and all that kind of thinking, and some of the things that we've been talking about earlier today. And under them, they're actually managing Momentum, who are our transport engineers. So we've got our core sort of team of experts, but as I said before, I think there's a whole load of other skill sets within Winchester that we can draw upon in order to sort of fill this out. Some images of those practices work, which I don't necessarily need to dwell on hugely because it'd be great to get to questions, because I'm sure we've got loads. So Simon Henley's work, Henley Hale Brown, talked about the co-housing, Sterling nominated Housing Design Awards, RIBA Awards for the housing work that he's been doing in Hackney recently. And this was a very early project where I actually got to meet Simon, because the guy that ran this project, the project architect, then left Simon to set up an architecture practice with me, and he always thought very fondly of it, which is Talk Back Productions headquarters in central London, which again is that kind of adaptive reuse of an existing building, which Simon's been doing for 20 odd years. You know, before it was sort of cool, you know, he's always seen that there's a benefit in using existing buildings. And these are more examples of Peter's work. Again, you can see that sort of gentle density, no more than 4-storey. Bringing people together, little nooks for people to occupy, make their own, so it's not all kind of anonymous and I don't know where somebody lives and things like that. And just wonderful, wonderful work. And East, in terms of landscape, again, as I talked about, that kind of actually quite tough urban design. I was going to say subtle, but then somebody pointed out writing Altham in massive letters isn't necessarily that subtle, but actually quite wonderful landscape architects. And that sort of think about, is it a bench or is it something that a market store user can use to display goods on and sell from, rather than necessarily having single-use objects. So how can our public realm do more than one thing? And I think that's really important to get as much value out of everything that we do on this project. Turner Works, Carl spoke about not only engagement, but also this meanwhile aspect, which again we've spoken about before. This is his scheme in Brixton, Pop Brixton, which is one of the very first meanwhile schemes happened in London. Then he did Peckham Levels, which was effectively the reuse of an existing car park. Got one of those. Could do some of that, maybe. Don't know. Haven't figured it out yet. And then the scheme at Hackney, where I think you've moved your office to. Is that right? It's so good, he moved there himself. It's like he's like Remington, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. Remington. So good, I bought the company. There you go. For those of a certain age. Which I reckon I'm in the middle of that demographic in this. It's like useful project expedition, sustainability, but actually this little image is very passionate to me, because this was a project we worked on together, which was a competition run by the government called Homes 2030, and basically it was 8 government departments who all wanted different things, basically saying, let's run a competition, see whether these guys can juggle it all and bring it all together. And I think we did that quite well, with a particular focus on embodied carbon, interoperability. So therefore, how do different materials join? So materials in themselves, is kind of interesting, but how things meet and come apart can be reused in the future. So effectively, we want to be, I guess, as an industry, building a materials bank for the future. When we build, it's not just what's it going to do today, but what's it going to do into the future, so we can leave the planet better than we found it, with materials for future generations to use and to be able to access that in their buildings. And obviously that's one of the benefits of rental. So a lot of people balk at the idea of rental housing, because it's like, well, if you're not buying, you don't, you haven't made it. But actually, increasingly the home ownership bit of life is actually a small portion of life. You kind of live at home, where you're completely looked after, hopefully. You go to university, where you kind of live in a sort of supported kind of accommodation. You might then rent, you might then buy a home, and then you might move to retirement. Actually, the bit in the middle is kind of different, whereas actually with one of the hidden benefits, I think, of rental is that because it's owned by an institution or owned by an organisation, they can be responsible for it. And they could be responsible for that material, for that maintenance, for that longevity. And at the end of its life, they could be responsible for making sure it's used again. So I think there's a whole sustainability story about rental that's not even being told, that we could do something really special here, because not only could we rent homes, we're renting creative space and other kinds of spaces to start-up businesses and people who might want to live and work here. And we've got the skills and we've got the operational skills to be able to do that here in Winchester. And then finally on the team, I just thought I'd show some pictures of holes in the ground. So this is pre-construct, and this is the site that we're working on at Bermondsey. So this is there's a small site across the road, and then there's a much bigger site because it was the biggest abbey, I think, in Britain. And we had to excavate quite a lot of it and then build over the top of it. So we kind of really understand when you're excavating quite shallow what we need to do in order to then protect that work and then build over the top of these spaces. And we're particularly, unfazed by that. And then this is some of his work, and you might recognise it better than me, of work that pre-construct have done around Winchester. Which sort of leads on then to a little bit of, I guess, thinking, because although we were told not to design anything, it's like, what's your understanding? You know, how do you read Winchester? It's this Winchester point, Winchesterness point. Who came up with the Winchesterness? Somebody in this room must have done it. No, anyway, it's really hard to say when you've got a dry mouth. So he's going to take a sip. So, all right, we blame the guys that aren't in the room.
Exactly,
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so you know, I think it's sort of interesting when people talk about let's recreate the street pattern, because it's a bit like, which one? You know? So there's many, and I think that because over the 2,000 years there's this sort of layered history, I think actually we're custodians of those layers, and we're adding another one, and it just needs to be respectful of what went before. Because if you try and recreate something, you're going to be choosing one over another. And I think actually what we have at the moment, there's enough in what's left on this particular site to give us some clues about how we might place shape. And I think I'll just show probably a few images of that. We love this image until I think Richard pointed out earlier today that this was full of poo at the time. And then somebody in the Abbey thought it'd be great to put drainage in. And then, you know, they had this bit of a battle between people who didn't mind the smell and people who wanted to get rid of it. Anyway, but I think visually, on a visual level, the idea of that sort of gentle density, the long view, the water, you know, there's some clues in there of something that we really like. And I think if we can create moments which resonate in the way that resonates, it would be wonderful. And I think this image from view from St. Giles, sort of, and the grain and the way in which north-south, the grain of the urbanism, the morphology sort of runs in and follows the waterways and then runs up the hill. It's sort of really interesting when you compare it to the image that's in the SPD, because actually it's the same. You know, and why wouldn't it be the same? And actually there's some gentle bits of removal of elements that we might need to do in order to sort of, that bit, not that bit, that bit, to do in order to sort of get back to here to then build onto there in order to create something which has sort of grown out of the pattern which exists beneath. So I think the geology and the water and the biodiversity, all of those things, I think we need to start with that and then figure out how we build with it, not against it. And I think we've been fighting water too long, and I think we need to sort of embrace it and understand that we've got to sort of go with the flow, if you want, pardon the pun. And I thought it was really interesting reading the SPD. From critical of one thing, it's that there was some examples of and analyses of key spaces in Winchester. I think one of them, somebody's probably going to correct me, but I think one of them that wasn't in it was Buttercross. And yet, when I look at the Buttercross, and I think if somebody said to me, explain to me Winchesterness, or Winchester, depending which way you want to, I would say this just shows all of these components. The Simon calls them precincts, you know, this kind of outdoor room, the street, passageways through underneath covered buildings, gable ends, bay windows, towers, materials, monuments, roof forms, chimneys, the silhouette, the long view, you know, through to this way, through to the landscape beyond. And again, all of that can be fuel and inspiration for a new layer, a new architecture, which actually talks to this. And I don't think, I'm sure it's, you know, some people might want to try and recreate that, but actually I think you can't. I think it's happened over time, and I think this incremental development that the SPD calls for, though it might not be the kind of time frame it took to build that, allows us to kind of let something evolve and as we go. So, you know, we don't need to commit wholly in the first phase to a style. You know, I think it can, and with multiple architects, we can actually have a bit of architecture wars in the right way, you know, kind of, yeah, frisson. There you go, frisson. But you can't stop architects from drawing, right? So the way, you know, some people make notes, architects doodle. So these are Simon's doodles about just trying to understand and think about, well, what's important? Because he had to write a lot. It's like, you know, sometimes you have to sketch something and then write about it. So creating urban blocks, making sure the urban realm all flows and connects together, yet is actually made up of some key, almost outdoor rooms and spaces so that it's not all the same thing. Creating visual connections between one space and the other. It's that Gordon Cullen thing that I was talking about before. The grain, making sure, again, it's not one monolithic thing, it's made up of many components, and ensuring that the routes make sense. And I think there's a lot of great work that's been done on the movement strategy. I think I won't dig myself into a hole here because I'm quite passionate about actually pushing it harder, but I think that really understanding how people move around Winchester, where people want to get to and where they want to go to, supporting that and listening. I'm a fanatical cyclist, but my kind of cycling isn't the same as other people's kind of cycling, so I don't need to assume that everybody wants to cycle like I do. So, and I know from the numbers that I've seen so far that it's not a mode of transport that is particularly prevalent in Winchester, yet it could be given the right kind of environment, but you're trying to get everybody into the same space. You've got buses, delivery vehicles, cars, people on bicycles, all in the same space. And actually there's an opportunity, I think, to try and figure some of this stuff out. And I'm going to enjoy doing that, aren't I? I'm going to enjoy doing that. And this sort of figure ground drawing, I think, for us was kind of important because we just wanted to, you know, I was bored one morning and it's like, and nobody was doing anything. So I thought, I'm just going to colour Winchester in. And sort of got this map off Google Earth and started to block in all of these things and just look at the pattern of it, you know, and zoom into the site. And we sort of came up with this thing, which is how you can create such an indistinct place, as in the site, not Winchester, in terms of, you know, Iceland and the bus station, such an indistinct piece of urbanism that could be anywhere in such a prominent location. And we thought, is the challenge really to create something incredibly distinctive, but is also indivisible? So I think success would be in 10 years' time walking across this site and not noticing it. It's not shouting at you. It's not saying, here I am, I'm new and shiny. It's got to be something which just feels like it's of the place. For me, that would be really successful. And, you know, sure, there could be some moments, but it's not the whole scheme. The whole thing just needs to feel like it's kind of always been there. And this was a sketch that Julian from East did, which was then looking beyond the site and thinking, where do people want to go to? And this is just his kind of thought experiment, if you like. But we know companies who do really detailed mapping and really look at places in a lot of detail. So we want to build a scientific data, evidence base of how do people really move around Winchester, and if we do something, what likely consequences is that going to have, and how will that help us, and is it creating the kind of movement and that we want across Winchester? With the ultimate aim, I guess, of bringing, you know, some of those photographs back into this sort of mix of, you know, markets, food, antique clothing, you know, great variety of housing, the creative workspace. We want to, you know, create the studio maker spaces, the retail, the food, beverage. We think actually there's an opportunity for something that we're quite keen on, is a reuse and sharing economy hub. So are the things that people might have that they want to share, or is the things that we want to provide within our rental offer, where actually rather than everybody having a drill, you can borrow one. Not that we're encouraging everybody to drill holes in our rental houses, but, you know, that's just a different matter. A really good hotel. It might not be, we don't think, it doesn't feel like a 180-bed hotel here. It feels like it'd just be a really nice apart hotel, something which just adds something slightly different to the offer. Some new cultural space. We know that there's cultural institutions looking for space, and we really want to talk to them and engage them in this process. And I guess right at the centre of that, and critically, is how it's all glued together by that sort of fantastic public realm. And I mean, that's an awful lot about, I think, how we've tried to read what you gave us, which is the SPD. But, you know, if that's us, you know, you lot, for want of a better word, students, school leavers, future generations, key stakeholders, local businesses, neighbours, communities, Winchester City Council itself, local experts, we know there's a lot of experts out there. You know, how do we get together over the next 6 months and shape the plan that we want to move forward with? And these two groups we think are really important. One is we thought we'd create a futures group, which is maybe people who've got a bit more time, who can act as really critical friends to the project, who can work with us and maybe go back to the organisations that we might work with and help us sort of bring people along the journey, because we know that not everybody's got the same amount of time, but some people might have time they want to give in return for sort of bourbons and good coffee or something. And then, but similarly, you know, is there I called it a youth parliament yesterday, and I think Martin was quite pleased by the idea of handing some power to younger people. But is there a way of actually engaging younger people in this process? Because ultimately, in the time scale that this project's going to take, some of those people are going to go from people in school to school leavers to people who you want to stay and live in Winchester, and what kind of homes do they want to be living in, and what kind of place do they want, and what would actually attract them to stay. And similarly, university graduates, I mean, every city's got the same problem, so Winchester's not unique in the brain drain, but actually, you know, you only need to keep 10. It's not like we need to keep all of them, it's just 10 bright graduates who want to start a business here is enough to start a kind of a movement and start to create some energy around it. And so our roadmap over the next 6 months is really around launching on Commonplace, which is a digital platform, which I think some of you might be familiar with. I think there's 6,000 people already registered on Commonplace in Winchester. Just something that basically says to people, now you've had a break after the SPD of like 5 years. Are you still with us? Are you still energised? Do you want to be involved? How do you want to be involved? And just get a feel for the audience, because we've got an election coming and PERDA, so there's a sort of a break in what we can do. So we want to use the opportunity, first of all, just to get a real feel and try and build a database of names of people that we can engage with, and probably do some key engagement around the tenants at King's Walk, because we want to give them the security of knowing that, you know, we really want to try and work with them and keep them there, because actually it's something which is really working. We want to build on it. Build on it in the right way. And then we'll start a process of regular coffee mornings, engagement with community, and then build the engagement plan together. So how we go about working with you, it's not just we're going to start working with you. How we work with you, we don't know yet, because we don't know you, and we want people to say, well, actually, it'd be really nice, you know, we don't like these big groups. We'd rather you did this, or there's a whole group of unheard people over here that actually need a different kind of way of us talking to them. So I think we need to understand that, because in a sense, all you people who've come here today, which is brilliant, you know, I don't think we're going to struggle getting lots of input or lots of ideas or lots of criticism, which is fine. It's the other people that we need to think about. And in some respects, it'd be great if you can help us listen to them too, because they've got voices which perhaps haven't been traditionally heard in the engagement process. We then have our futures group and our youth group. I think there's an archaeological event coming up, which we really want to use as an opportunity. And we've got our test holes, our archaeological 4 pits which we're digging. So again, there's an opportunity to sort of get people engaged around that, particularly younger people would be great. Then we can expand the Commonplace platform to really start to ask people the questions that are coming out of what we're learning through this process. We'll then do what we call co-creation process, which is basically creating a kind of an in-person event where we start to play shape and create ideas and actually start to build a physical plan, which we can all share in and understand. So it's not us going, here's a plan we've come up with, what do you think? It's actually, let's create that together. And out of that can come our engagement output, which is basically, this is our north arrow, this is where we're going, almost like a sister document to the SPD. Here's the SPD, right? This is what Jigsaw bring to it with you, and it's an extension of that. And therefore, here's the brief, here's the development delivery plan. Jigsaw, now go and get on and do it. And then we can start to do a scheme, which we can then start to engage with, potentially in a more, we have to do the conventional planning process and consultation, but hopefully through this process, we'll have a much more open way of sort of sharing ideas with you. And one of the thoughts we've had is, you know, could we find a shop or something that we can live in, where people can just drop in at any time, talk to us about what's going on, hassle Carl, or one of his employees, he might be down here or something, and just make it something that makes it really accessible. How can be really accessible to you to help us shape this place going forwards? Because really it is for you, and this is just a collection of either people who live in Winchester, apologies if some of you are on here, or people that have been tenants in our projects, or Keith. Actually, Keith is our community organiser who we worked with in Swindon, who knocked on 300 doors as a part of the process of doing the scheme for Nationwide. And when we put that in for planning, there was 0 objections, which is incredible because we'd listened, and I think that's really important. So that's pretty much everything I've got to say. I just want to say thank you for you coming out and giving the time and listening to me bang on about us. But now an opportunity to ask us questions, me questions, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was really fantastic, and I suspect, I hope that you have some sense of why the council is so excited by Jigsaw as a partner. We now have time for some questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions, and who would like to start. Patrick.
Thank you. That was fascinating.
Sorry, can you introduce yourself for... No, we need it on a microphone so that it gets recorded.
Yes, thank you very much. That was fascinating. Patrick Davis, can I just make an observation about history of this site? I actually recall the first time anybody suggested development on this site was when Anne Gloag, who some may recall of Stagecoach, turned up on the then chief executive's doorstep and announced that she and I think it was when Stagecoach were first starting, so we're going back 30 odd years, if not further, and she was going around the country where they had bus stations, and she announced to the then chief executive, we could move all the buses out on the street tomorrow and redevelop this site. That, frankly, was the beginning of all this. Moving on to today, can I just be clear, the one thing that wasn't talked about at all is the nature of retail development, which is still being thought about. There was some reference to retail, food and beverages in the last few comments. Personally, I think that there must be a limit to the amount of drinking and eating places in Winchester with new development. But what about serious retail? Because when this started, some was very dubious about it, long before COVID, that the amount of new development for retail here would have a detrimental effect on the high street. Now, the high street has now already lost a great deal of, come on, put it, old-fashioned retail. Is it still intended to look seriously at new major retail on this site? And I mean, personally, I think it wouldn't be a good idea. The other thing is buses were mentioned in passing, but just where are we with buses? I'm a firm believer in buses. I use buses regularly. There's nervousness, I know, about what happens to the centre of the town for a bus station, but an awful lot of people depend on it because they come into the centre of the town to shop. They expect to get a bus back to wherever they live from the centre of the town. Where are we on that? Thank you.
Should we both have a go at that, or do you want to perhaps...
You go first.
Certainly, the SPD effectively stops us for going from the kind of large format retail that was talked about in the past, and it's certainly not part of the intention. Wasn't in the brief. You know, that isn't how we're thinking about it. We are thinking about how we replace the revenue that we currently get from existing shops, That is part of the expectation in the financial discussions that have gone on. But you know, the days of we're going to build a massive, great anchor store, that's gone. That's over, I think, unless you're going to surprise me. On buses, buses are, those of you who know me will know I'm also quite obsessed by them as well. And I'm very pleased to see Pete Robinson here this evening and from Stagecoach. And those of you who want to see the new electric bus going around the city, it'll be in the city centre tomorrow. We're taking a whole system view of buses. I want more people on buses, I want more buses, and I want a network that does that. We are also working on Station Approach. One of the opportunities we have through Station Approach is to look at better interchange between bus and rail and to make that a centre for green transport in our city. But we need to recognise that, you know, we understand the needs of people, where they want to get to, where they want to be. I mean, that was something that John was talking about. Any bus system has to get bus passengers to where they want to be and where they want to go from and where they want to interchange. And so the request, and I think what we're asking of Jigsaw is that absolutely they think about the needs of buses within the footprint, but it's part of a conversation with Stagecoach and the other operators and with the other developments and with Hampshire as they work on the movement strategy. And we submitted a proposal on Friday to central government that would turn Jury Street into a bus street. So there's a lot of energy at the moment looking at how we can do more for buses. And one of the things that we like about Jigsaw as a partner is that they see themselves being part of that, not just looking at the site in isolation. But I don't know if...
I think you nailed it.
There you go. A second, yeah. And again, if you could say, if you're from some organisation or...
No, I'm from no organisation. I'm just a retired resident of Winchester. My name's Tim Fell. I'd just like to mention a couple of things. When I saw the Chronicle online piece about tonight's events, I looked up the Jigsaw Consortium, and according to Companies House, it was dissolved on the 9th of April 2013. So what could somebody perhaps explain the constitutional status of Jigsaw? A couple of other things can I mention? Flooding was mentioned. The worst floods that have happened in my memory in Winchester were groundwater floods. So you'll have to allow for that in the design, the permeability in that sense of the city centre. One of the things that was hugely popular in the SPD was the idea of a museum of the Saxon age. There is no such museum in this Saxon town. It's an incredibly important part of its history. And please, if there's going to be one, make it better than your Vic in York, which is now very old and creaky. So my last point, it would be wonderful if ways were found of keeping lorries out of the centre of Winchester, having depots perhaps just off the M3 and perhaps up towards Bar End, where they can easily transfer their loads into small electric vehicles and perhaps allow lorries in after 7 at night and before 7 in the morning, but certainly not during the day. Thank you.
John, do you want to talk about the constitutional setup of Jigsaw? Is that... I also like constitutions as well as buses, so I can...
Well, a lot of people thought we were a clothes shop, so in some ways that's a relief. The short answer is that currently the legal entities, the partners to Jigsaw are the Kajima Generate Partnership and the PFP Igloo Partnership, and we've existed in those forms for some time. We've got the track record to show it. So if you look up those development vehicles, that's who effectively you're dealing with. We will come together. We've come together for this bid. The legal entity that will be formed will actually be called Partnerships and Places. The Jigsaw is very much about our approach. It's kind of a shorthand. None of our names were particularly rolled off the tongue. So Jigsaw was helpful in just sort of assimilating us as a team, but also, as I explained at the start, very much our approach to development and to placemaking and knitting into the fabric of existing cities. So there will be a legal entity. It will be known as Partnerships and Places. We'll nickname it Jigsaw because it's easier. But that will be formed at about the same time we sign the legal agreements with the council.
And if people need more reassurance, the legal agreement with the council, the so-called development agreement, puts quite tight controls on any change in composition of that partnership, so that any change in composition actually does need our permission in terms of the constitution of the arrangement. Groundwater floods.
Yeah, we know. So
maybe I'll have a go at lorries.
Won't crack the same joke again, but I'm standing up. So groundwater floods, yeah, we're aware from the evidence that we were given that, so I'm getting some feedback from this, I think, that the Middlebrook Street car park is probably the most critical place that...
Use the microphone as well.
Oh.
No, it should...
Can you not...
We have microphones and there's somebody at the back who are just...
Can you not hear me?
Not here. Okay.
Can you hear me okay now? So, no.
I'm sorry, but I'm not...
All right, do you want me to use the... I'm happy to use the microphone. But just turn this one off. Is that better? Yeah, okay. All right. So the groundwater flooding we're aware of predominantly on the Middlebrook car park. So we've got quite a lot of evidence around that. And at the moment, that's outside of our red line, but council do own it. And if it ever came forward for redevelopment, then that's something that we obviously would need to consider. But yeah, we know that going forwards in terms of flood resilience, that opening up the waterways will also help with that. What was the other point? Yeah, so again, I think I made reference to cultural institutions in the presentation, so we're aware that there is a requirement or a demand around that particular museum, and I think that their desire, I think, was to be in wall staplers. Sorry, somebody just looked at me as if it's like... But we would be happy to accommodate it within the site, even if it was a temporary move until wall staplers was available or another venue. So I think it's kind of listening to what's needed and trying to figure out a way to make that happen. So again, we don't have a solution, but we are aware of it.
And the point relating to lorry transfer, that is a priority of the movement strategy. The discussions going on between Hampshire and Winchester City Council in terms of finding a site that would work. It won't be for all deliveries. There's only certain types it's possible to arrange cross-shipment for. But there is a very clear desire and objective to cut the amount of large vehicles going through the city within the movement strategy, and active work being looked at to make that happen at the moment. And I think one of the things that will be really important and we will be encouraging is that, the wishes, the interests of Jigsaw and the needs of Central Winchester will be interacting with the work that's being done on the movement strategy. I mean, I think there's an exciting opportunity here with their expertise, their transport consultants that they bring to the party to hopefully help us further develop our thinking and move ahead on our ideas in terms of how the movement can work in the city. Yes, Joan. And if you could say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Jo Crocker. I work for Winchester Action on Climate Change. Just wanted to say thank you for taking it seriously. I can see why you're excited, and I think I want to also acknowledge Winchester City Council for making sure that the climate change question and sustainability is written into whatever you do here. If we don't do that, then we're being very backward looking, I think, and it will relate to every part of our life, so thank you. And it makes me feel excited at the thought of being a resident here, which I have been for 20 years, and I have 2 teenage kids who call this home too, that we might create something here that they feel proud to be part of and that we all want to live in. So thanks.
John?
I'm speechless, so
He's only just got going on.
I've given such a hard time. Given such a hard time.
Brilliant yesterday. Anyway, Eleanor.
Thank you. Eleanor Bell. I live outside of Winchester. I live in a place actually renowned for its groundwater flooding. So I'm very used to that. We live with it. It came up to critical this year and went down again. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was really, really bad. The problem we have in this city, in this country rather, is that we allow surface water and roof downpipe water into the sewer system. And that's a major national thing that isn't allowed in other countries at all. And that's why we have the problems, I think, that we've had sometimes in Winchester in the city centre. But that's beyond this project. Because I live outside the city, I like to come in and go out regularly, and that means transport. And I'm very much in favour, if not a bus station, it's an old-fashioned word, but a transport hub, a transport interchange, somewhere where it's easy to know where you've come into, where you can go back again. And that isn't, like in a previous plan, a number of scattered bus stops on the Broadway and in Friarsgate. That just doesn't hack it. But somewhere that is actually the transport interchange for the city. The other thing that I'm really, really keen about, people dismiss it, is, well, markets, covered markets. Lots and lots of cities in Britain, but certainly across the continent, have thriving markets. And for some reason, people think that won't work in Winchester. I think it would. I'd love to see that. And then finally, on rental, I absolutely agree. There's no reason why rental shouldn't be a perfectly sensible aspiration, even of a certain period in people's lives. And again, in other countries, that is very well provided for. But what you need then, not the luxury market, but at the ordinary market, quality entrances, well-maintained staircases and lifts, green space outside, storage and parking underneath, play areas, community allotments, whatever you want to call it, but, you know, quality places to rent, not acquisitive or abusive freeholders, not exploitative management companies. We could go on and on and on, but our rental market is broken. Rental is great, but the system isn't, so good luck.
Thank you, Eleanor. And speaking as a former member of the Shelter Campaigns Department, I'd also add security of tenure. But do we have any more questions or comments? John, if you could announce yourself and say who you are.
Hi, John Hearn. I'm a resident and a town planner. I wanted to ask, how challenging do you think it will be to put housing on the Central Winchester Regeneration area, given that a large proportion of it is within the floodplain? And under previous schemes, to resolve that, they've put private parking for housing underneath at ground level. And given that the Winchester Movement strategy's first priority is to reduce city centre traffic, will you be able to think of another viable use at ground level if you put housing, which I'm sure most people in this room would support, and probably support housing for rent as well?
use the microphone again so that they can. Yeah, so I don't think the flood categorisation on the site is so bad that we can't put housing on it. I think that, we can be quite creative with where habitable rooms are in relation to that ground plane, and so or find alternative uses. We're not going to put car parking there. We are super comfortable having a zero parking scheme on a site in central Winchester. And if people don't want to live in a house that hasn't got a car parking spaces, there's be other places. So we're not, and I don't think that should be driving the end result in Winchester, because if you're looking at that Winchester-ness, I don't think parking under buildings is kind of one of the components of it. There might be some stables and there might be some arches that carriages and horses went through, but yeah, we're not in that space. So we're very comfortable with being unconventional. So we will find a solution to put housing on this site because that's what we think is needed.
No, okay. I've lost control.
My name's Roger Tetstall, and I'm a local resident too. I thought it was a great presentation full of really exciting ideas. Beyond one reference to making the numbers work, there was no mention of finance, and my perception is that town centre regeneration schemes tend to depend upon the willingness of the developer to put money into them. And I guess I'm seeking some reassurance that Winchester City Council, on behalf of us, will have the necessary leverage to ensure that the developer does actually commit funds, and we don't find ourselves in a situation which many others have, where you have a vision statement or a master plan which effectively sits on the shelf.
The ability and the proven ability of Jigsaw to resource and fund any scheme was a critical part of any assessment process, and there will be a decision point at the time that the planning application is made, an outline planning application for the whole site with a detailed planning application for the first phase of the site, where Jigsaw will need to prove to themselves that they have a viable business case. We will need, through due diligence, through the final business case process that we're required to go through, prove that it's financially desirable or prudent for the council. And we will also need, for planning purposes, to show that it's consistent with the SPD, but actually goes beyond that and achieves the kind of ambitions that Jigsaw have laid out, that we set within the development brief, and that we laid out, and that they've laid out in their response to that brief. We've picked them because they are, one of the reasons that Jigsaw have been chosen, and one of the reasons that they are the consortium that they are, is that they have people within that consortium who are able to fund the kind of development that we want to see in the city. I mean, was it Tamsin yesterday? It was Tamsin who had a very good answer on the nature of the different parties and how that works in terms of funding. And I don't know if you want to quickly say something about that.
I thought I'd escaped that one. So exactly as Councillor Todd has said, that actually one of the strengths of our partnership is we have investors on both sides and with different investment strategies. So Generate Kojima Regeneration Limited are very much an early investor, so we will develop and spend money and time and risk capital in terms of working up that plan and actually creating a viable and developable scheme. And then our partners, PFP Igloo, are long-term funders, so they will have that long-term interest. And actually what that creates is something where we have a long-term view on that return, and we have the long-term vision, and actually understand that investing in that in the quality, in the placemaking, will create those returns in the long run. So yeah, so we've got that. We can stand here confidently today, and as Councillor Todd says, there's a steady process to take us to that point in terms of working up those schemes and running those numbers. But but we've got the backing behind us to be able to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. You've got the, do you want to use it?
I would ask that we would get rid of this terrible word, Winchesterness. I don't know what it means. Can someone give a definition? Surely we could just say the character of Winchester, or the soul of Winchester, or the appearance of Winchester. I don't know, but Winchesterness is just not English. It's just not good grammar. Secondly, when there was a question about the buses, you mentioned buses running along Jury Street was a proposal. But I think the important thing is, if there were buses that came as far as Jury Street, that wouldn't really help, because everyone would have to walk all the way up the hill to get a bus. And it just wouldn't be on. The other thing is, I would just like briefly to say, please don't base your design on the Brook Centre. We would all like a bomb under that, I think. There was a public consultation before that was built. People voted on different designs, and I think that was the one that had the least votes, which was chosen. And it's a dreadful building. It excludes everyone. It's no inclusion of, you could drive past and not know what it's for. And the other thing is, very quickly, I understand we have 25 million based from the City Council to do this scheme, is it? I was looking at, there are 3 architects and all these other people. If we're going to have to pay for all these people, are we going to run out of money? Right. That's all.
So I can Winchesterness is a word that not all of us find. It is useful shorthand that is used as code within the team to refer to exactly what you said, which is the character of Winchester. We're using it because it's within the SPD. I think your point, which is don't allow it to become an obstacle for understanding, make sure that we use it to reflect the character of the city, which is, I think, what we saw in the presentation today, where I don't know about you, but every time I see that, I think Jigsaw get it. They understand a lot of what makes the city special, and that's what matters. We weren't sitting there looking for, when they were assessed, we weren't sitting there looking for a kind of, do they have the right dictionary definition? We were looking for a sense of, do they understand exactly what you talked about, the character of the city? Maybe we'll change that. We'll see if we can get away with it. Apologies if I caused you concern about where the buses are going to go. They are definitely going to be going near the high street, not least because Pete Robinson would run me over with a bus if we didn't allow that to happen. No, and one of the partners that I know at an early stage that that Jigsaw want to talk to is Stagecoach and the other bus operators, precisely because we all share the objective, especially the bus operators, of getting more people to use buses and for it to become a better service for people in Winchester. And that will include, do not worry, there will be, buses to the bottom of town, there will be buses that bring you near the high street. There is no danger that there will not be buses in convenient places, because we recognise that that's part of getting people to use them. And the reference to the Brook Centre, I'm not going to use the term Winchesterness, but actually if you look at the definition and what was laid out by Jigsaw when they talked about the bus about Winchesterness, I think we can safely say that the Brook Centre breaks every single one of those principles that we were trying to put in place. And I'm sure, I don't know if John wants to add a much more eloquent, it'd be good to hear John's take on the Brook Centre for amusement, if nothing else.
It's not particularly eloquent, but if we ever do anything that's vaguely similar to the Brook Centre, you have permission to get this guy to run me over with a bus?
After
Martin.
The 25 million is a reference. It's not strictly accurate reference to how much the City Council has invested in the land in that area. And that land at the moment gives us a certain revenue. And our contribution from this point onwards, and this is effectively why we've got Jigsaw as a partner, is that land. And there will be a discussion between ourselves and Jigsaw in terms of how we continue to get a return on that land. At the moment, it's not a secret, we get about £720,000 a year in revenue from all the different tenants and shops and car parks in that area. So one of the discussion points later in the process will be how we continue to get that revenue, which is what we've decided we will prioritise. Obviously, if you get rid of the asset, you no longer have your 15 million or 25 million pound asset, then you don't have any revenue with it. And the council's decision is that our priority is to recover revenue, is to generate revenue for the site, which can then be used for other things within the city as well.
This is on. It's probably worth adding that you're not having to spend a penny more now, because that's why we're here.
That's a really key point. Why we need an expert development partner that understands the types of investment that are needed, has the relationships, has the partnerships, will spend the money wisely that is needed to put a scheme in place. And that's not something that the City Council, we have the expertise in-house to do. That's why we need an external partner. But part of the arrangement we have, and the part of the arrangement in the development agreement, is they will be the people putting finance at risk in order to fund that development process. So that's their commitment to the process. But one of the reasons we want to work with them and why we were so keen on engagement and making sure there's the right public engagement is that that will be how we make sure that they get that money back, that it does actually lead to a scheme, does actually get built, does actually happen. This is why we're so excited about Jigsaw as a partner, because we believe they are the partner who can do that. Lots of hands. Yes. I don't know what we've done.
I punched you. Hi, I'm Harriet Morris. I'm Executive Director of The Nutshell, where you all are, so thank you all for coming. I just wanted to stand up and say thank you to follow on from Winchester Climate Action. It's really exciting. I've lived in Winchester my whole life, went to school here, college, and started up this business sort of 12 years ago. So it's really exciting to see all of the plans finally come together. But we also wanted to extend our huge thanks to Verian and the team at JLL, because, we live in King's Walk with all of our other tenants here. It hasn't been easy. It equally hasn't been easy to hear a lot of people say negative things about the space, because yes, there's lots of challenges, but we've made incredible headway here. Big footfall, really exciting things, sold out events, working with over 100 young people every week. We're doing a lot of amazing things here, and I think that's important to say that it's already happening. We're really excited about the journey going forward, but for Verian, to you and your team, just thank you so much for clear direction and talking us through the whole process. It's been wonderful, so thank you very much.
Brilliant. Gentleman at the back.
Sorry, is this on? Yep. I'm a local resident and a local architect. I just wanted to make a comment, supportive one, on the architectural team proposed. From my perspective within the industry, I'd like to say that this is a team of the highest quality that's been put together, and for that I would like to commend the developers, partnership vehicle, and also the council for recognising that this project is one that demands that kind of stature of investment, of talent and quality. I'm also encouraged by the approach that those designers will show, and also the outcome that they will no doubt come up with. I'm encouraged by the fact that incremental development's been mentioned, and the phased development, a diversity of styles, and also the opportunity for local practices and local architects to get involved. So I just support everything that's been said today, and wanted to support particularly the design approach that's been put forward, and look forward to seeing how it develops.
Thank you. Judith.
Judith Martin, long-term resident and somebody with a strong eye, careful eye on heritage. Martin might need smelling salts, but I'm actually pretty impressed. I think John, the second John, got me first with embodied carbon, embodied energy, which is, there's so much here, and it was all going to be swept away, including at one point this building. The other is Peter Barber, who's just one of the best architects, and particularly for social housing. So that's very, very positive. I do still have one or two questions. One is that in your great mesh of professionals, you've got archaeology, but you don't have the sort of intermediate heritage, and there isn't much of this sort of industrial heritage left in Winchester. But you noticed that I reacted when you said wool staplers. I don't know what, are you trying to get hold of wool staplers? I mean, it's been pretty spoilt, I think. It certainly isn't listable, but it's in very bad condition. It needs rescue fairly soon, I would say. It would make a very good museum space. I'm agnostic on Saxon museums, but that's another matter. It would have to wash its face. What we don't really have here is a permanent art collection, like most other major cities. The question of the land holding, I have heard some fairly extraordinary figures about the length of a lease. Is that right, or is it going to be a long lease? Part of my reason for asking is that I think it needs to be lots of talk about permeability and so forth, but fully open space. And something like the Brooks it's private space. It looks as though it's public space, but it's not. And all over London, there are areas of ostensibly public places, space that turn out not to be. And I would like that not to be the case. And I'd hope that this isn't going to be such a long lease that the council really, is handing over a virtual freehold. I think that's probably due, actually. But I really am. Yeah, no parking. I mean, this is just such an improvement. Winchester has had very good architects on schemes before, and they've kind of gone off with their tail between their legs. But I really hope this doesn't happen again. Thanks.
No, I have. Judith, you've left me speechless. Yes, so the land gets released under the terms of the development agreement. The land gets released in phases as each bit is given planning permission, and the terms of the lease are 250 years. Relative bagatelle in Winchester terms, but that is something we interrogated at quite some length at the cabinet meeting and also at scrutiny, and is effectively what's needed if you want a large-scale, ambitious regeneration. In London, the figures, and Jen from JLL can correct me if I'm wrong, are now 999 years for this kind of lease, which is a long time even by Winchester standards. But the advice we've received, we have other leases that aren't quite as long but are pretty long. The GP surgery that's being built, I think, is 150 years. But for this kind of larger scale, this is what is the expectation. And the reason it's important is that that level of security is needed by the developer in order to access finance. And so if we didn't do that, it would actually be an obstacle to getting the project done. And can you want to, yeah.
On that, because it sounds like the concern is the privatisation of public space. So I think one of the reasons we want to do the co-creation process with people is to understand what that means, because everybody's got a different idea about what is public, what is private. People use the word semi-public, meaningless, like it's either public or it's private. But what is good private space that the public are allowed to go through and pass through? And there's lots of that throughout the country, which is really exemplary in different people's eyes. So I think we need to kind of get together and think, what does good look like? what is it that we actually want, and then how do we create that within the structure of the lease so we can get finance, but to give people the access they deserve and will need to make this a part of Winchester. So there's the kind of the reality of the lease, but then there's also the lived reality of what we create and the way in which we manage it and the way in which we ensure that people have the right levels of freedom, you know, or have freedom even, you know, not levels of freedom. So I think we just need to spend some time to understand what we all mean by public-private space and access. And if in a sense we reach an impasse, maybe we need to come up with other solutions around what becomes adopted and handed back. So we don't have a solution yet. That's why we want to work with you, because it's like, if it fails on that point, it will fail completely. So we kind of just need to spend the time understanding the concerns, really.
In order to facilitate public access to private land, it would be done through a 106 planning legal agreement. But my understanding is that you can't have one if a council owns the land. But there may be some other lawyers in here that know different.
I think that shows that this is an area that we need to look at more carefully, and there are new models coming forward. I mean, you know, there are assets that the City Council once held and are now run by St John's Charity, admittedly, because the City Council was massively corrupt and they passed an Act of Parliament to take them off us. But in the 1820s, I would hasten to add, not recently. And for example, I know the big Wellbourne development, they're looking at a Wellbourne Trust, which will be a community trust as a way of managing public spaces. And the conversation, the proposal that came forward was looking at how you designed a vehicle that had public stakeholders involved in it, as well as residents, as you know. So I think that is a topic for discussion going forward, but there are new and innovative and much more community-centred and public-centred models out there that we could look at, because you know there's always that slight risk, is if we say we totally rely on the public funding model. Well, have you seen the state of the roads recently? You know, that is not, that the reality is that we need to make sure that the outcomes that we want are delivered, and that it works in a way that is good for the long term in the city. And as is highlighted by the terms, long term in Winchester means long in this case. Did we want to talk about relationship, what happens in terms of neighbouring bits of land and other such things? Is that conversations with landowners? They will happen or not happen, or is that they will happen? Okay. Richard, I think.
Just a comment. Chairman, is it on? Yep. Richard Baker, City of Winchester Trust. In April 2017, we had a community planning weekend attended by 700 people. And that generated a lot of enthusiasm and goodwill for generating this area. It is very gratifying this evening to see not only all the seats occupied, but standing room at the back. And I do hope that that goodwill and enthusiasm is now going to be ignited again, so that we can build on that solid platform of the supplementary planning guidance document and proceed and hopefully achieve a regeneration of which we're all going to be very proud. Thank you.
The gentleman there. Oh, sorry, Emma.
Hello, I'm Neil Wyatt. I run the Southdown Social, the cafe on the corner of King's Walk there. We're actually one of the newer King's Walk tenants. So to further what Harriet said, there's people here who've been putting a lot of energy and effort into improving this part of town. So it's great to see these plans and see things actually beginning to happen after what feels like quite a lot of talk over quite a long period of time. I just wanted to kind of add to that and say that one of the things I think is a problem in Winchester is a lack of opportunity, because we see a relatively small amount of retail space and of office space, and we see very high rents on the high street, particularly in comparison to Southampton to Salisbury, even to Guildford and places like that. And so I really hope that the regeneration of this part of town will create opportunities for young people to stay in Winchester, to start their own businesses, to find employment in businesses, to find reasonably priced housing that they can move into. So I know I'm sort of answering for you here in a way, because I have had conversations with Varian, but she knows that it's really important, I think, that the rents in this area are kept low so that those businesses and new businesses like me have a chance, because we couldn't have started our business on the high street. We certainly couldn't have stayed in business on the high street, even with the extra footfall. So it's really important, if you want that vibrancy, that opportunity for new independent businesses to start up rather than just chains who are chasing market share, that you keep those rents accessible in this part of town. And that means that everyone has a chance really to keep young people, to keep young people in the area, and to attract new businesses and new investment into the area as well.
Absolutely, strongly agree, and it's a core part of the design development brief that we're using to guide the project. Emma, apologies for not calling you earlier.
Thank you. My name's Emma. I've been involved in a number of voluntary groups locally, but I'm here just as a resident. I've lived in the city for more than 2 decades. I was really pleased to see the presentation and to hear the emphasis on sustainability, particularly interested to hear about your plans for youth engagement, so I don't have to ask you that question. I've been concerned about the possibility of creating POPs, privately owned public spaces, in this part of the city for some time, so thanks, Judith, for your question on that. I'm not sure we've quite ironed out the answers, really. It does sound as if we will be creating privately owned public spaces here, in the sense that the site will be owned by who? By the new entity, Partnerships and Places, for the next 250 years. Who will be responsible then for maintaining the public spaces, for security in those public spaces? Will there be bylaws created related to those public spaces? It'd be good to have a little bit more clarity on that. In particular, I noted that one of your consortium members is PFP Capital. Does PFP stand for Places for People? Okay, we've talked a lot about track record, and unfortunately Places for People have a very negative track record in this city. The history here is that they managed and ran into the ground our leisure centre and developed some inappropriate relationships, I'll say no more than that, to try and get exclusive rights to build the new leisure centre. Those of us who were involved in heading that off, have the scars on our backs. It was really unpleasant, time-consuming, stressful, and we don't want to go through that again. So I would really like to hear a bit more about the role of PFP Capital in this project, and indeed Places for People more generally. And hopefully you can offer us some reassurance around that. Thank you.
Right. John?
I'll do my best on that, which may not be good enough now. I'm not aware of that situation. That's the short answer to that, unfortunately, so I can't particularly comment on that. Places for People Capital is part of the Places for People group, but we are a separate entity. So I can go away and find out what's happened there, and I can come back, but I can't speak to it now, unfortunately. Places for People Capital, as I say, is a separate entity, and our track record as PFP Igloo, I think, speaks for itself, and we've got fantastic working relationships all across the country with local authorities and communities. And so I think if you judge us, if you judge us, and that's the people you'll be contracting with here, then I would hope you would see, and you will see as we go through this process, you'll have a very different experience of our business than perhaps you've had of the wider group.
And POPs, do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I think as I said before, I think we need to And Martin started to add to it some of the other structures that we could put around it in terms of, you know, community interest groups and those sorts of things, or how we get people involved in the kind of management and running an operation of those spaces. I mean, ultimately, if we've got the long lease, we're responsible for it. So the cleaning, the maintenance, and all those things sort of sits with us. But how we go about doing it, the manner in which it's done, I think is sort of like an open book. You know, that's one of the reasons we want to engage. And that's why I think lots of people have different views on, you know, for example, a lot of people hold up King's Cross by Argent as a kind of amazing piece of regeneration and public realm. But actually, you know, if you're not wanted there, they'll get rid of you. So I think we need to have a discussion about, is that good version or is that a bad version? You know, and if it's a bad version, what's bad about it and what do we need to do that's different? Because, you know, 95% of the property industry will tell you it's fantastic. But actually, I think it doesn't do what we want it to do, which is actually create places that anybody can go to at any time of day. And so we need to figure that out together and come up with a structure by which it would work. That's all I can say, because we don't know yet what that will be, but we have it's in our gift to create something that works for everyone. So we need the input. So thank you for being strong, you know, and saying those things, because it's easy, isn't it, to sort of agree sometimes on, you know, some of the things we hear, but actually it's the problems we need to get into, the knotty things that we need to try and figure out together.
No, I think that's really helpful, and I think the point there is that, you know, when we define what great public realm is, then that needs to include its access and accessibility over time. Let's not forget, we have POPs in Winchester now. You know, the outer close and the inner close are POPs. They're not public space. They're owned by the cathedral. If you walk to St Cross, you're walking through college land. That's a POP as well. It's not maintained publicly. So, you know, there are models which have served us well, and maybe we need to find out how they work as well. So I think there are ways of doing it, but I think your point, which is to say we need to have a really clear view, and what we don't want is some of the excesses that we've heard in other places, and I don't think people would stand for it, frankly. I wouldn't, so there you go. Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm Ross. I'm a local resident and also an architect for my sins. I just want to say thank you to the Johns and Tamsin and yourself, Councillor Todd, for the presentation. It's really exciting and yeah, good to see something coming forward in this part of the city, which we've been waiting for a long time. So thank you first and foremost for that. Secondly, and I'll keep it brief, it's quite clear listening to everyone here that the kind of movement is a really big part of this, and there's obviously the limitations of the site itself for Central Winchester Regeneration. It's fantastic to hear John speaking about, you know, movement more widely across the city, but it'd be great to hear a bit more about how that dovetails with the timeline for the Winchester movement strategy in particular. And how those two pieces of work can come together for the good of the city. Thank you.
The movement strategy, yeah, the movement strategy is a lot of the changes to the highway that would be needed and the plans that are needed because of the state of local government finance. Are such that you're very dependent on making bids to central government. You know, it's designing up plans, thinking what the future looks like. The actual timing at times is going to be hard to predict. I think, and there are elements of it which possibly could throw up dependencies when we look at it. Much of it won't, because it will relate to other parts of the city. And one of the things about the movement strategy is you do need to look at the city as a whole in terms of how you're managing it. So, for example, the Mini Holland that went in jointly, well, from the county backed by the city last week, is something that is about making it easier to walk and cycle more in the outer parts of the city, but would have an impact in what was happening in travel patterns in the centre. Similarly, things like the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan that's sort of nearing completion, that talks about the radial routes and how people get in and out of the city will have an impact on what our options are in this development. In terms of whether there are major changes that would have huge dependencies, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about when you're thinking over 250 years is versatility. And so we've talked about it in terms of buildings. I think there may be an element that needs to be done in terms of making sure that we do that also in terms of highways and movement, to make sure that we're not closing down options inadvertently, and that when there are potential changes that might be coming at some point in the future, we haven't designed things in such a way that we can't implement them. And that's certainly something we're thinking very hard about in terms of station approach, where there are some very big dependencies in terms of what you can do with car parking space and other such things based on things like having a North Park and Ride and the like. We don't have quite the same dependencies in the centre. There is a car park, but it's a car park that in practice we could easily close and it won't have a major impact in terms of movement. Obviously the bus question is a more complex one, but there is an interim bus solution that's already been agreed with the bus companies and Hampshire and Highways that will enable us to proceed with the development. So that's already been worked through. I think the main answer for the longer term is that Igloo and the city and Hampshire have to keep talking with each other, and if we get to a point where there are dependencies, then that has to affect the sequencing of work in the movement strategy and may also have an impact on the sequencing of work within Central Winchester. But I don't know if you have any other. I realise I have a slight advantage in the sense that I've lived the movement strategy for the last few years, but...
Sounds painful. Yeah, I think that anything look, we're another part of the jigsaw, pardon the pun, right? So the more people you've got here who are passionate, who bring investment to the city, the better, and the more we can join up and figure out how the movement strategy citywide is going to work helps. Now, it's some time off until you've got a development partner on the station approach, but you know what we need to do is think, what do we need? What are we trying to achieve within that red line? Okay, but actually more critically, what can we do outside that red line that's going to make within the red line work even better? And we know that the movement around the site is absolutely critical. We know that buses are critical, but you know the reason that we want to address this issue is actually air quality. You know, so that particular location on Friarsgate next to our site is some of the poorest air quality in the city. And if you're trying to create an attractive place for people to live, you want to address that air quality issue. And so, you know, sometimes we look at, and it's one of our, you know, we're still formulating our strategy, but trying to get funding on a transport issue is one way to go around it. But actually, maybe if we're looking at it from a, you know, air quality, net zero carbon position, which is actually a bigger picture story, then perhaps there's some other arguments here that we can use to try and attract some investment and divert some of the way in which we spend our money in sort of addressing that. So we had long conversations about actually can we temporarily, for example, look at Friarsgate as somebody's putting their hand in their mouth and going, oh God, John's saying it. But look, we're just being open because we don't, like I said, we don't have a plan. But if we could temporarily make Friarsgate two-way, you know, to test what that would be like and see what impact that would have, that would be great because that's actually what's in the movement strategy. So why wouldn't you want to test it? For us to benefit and for you to benefit is if we're going to be building here for 10 years, all the construction traffic isn't driving through the city, you know, and that's going to be huge. So we would love to try and figure out how to make that happen. We don't have a solution yet, but we're talking about it. So it's not like we're just bearing out, it's not like, oh, that's somebody else's problem. It's actually, let's help Martin, let's help the team, let's help you figure this out, you know. So it's like I said, it's just conversation, but we're thinking. And if anybody's got ideas and we're doing these workshops, people come forward and share them with us because we need to build that case, that argument to have with whoever we're going out and seeking funding from in order to help us do it. And when I say seeking funding, obviously we've got the finance to do the red line, but we know that there's grants and other monies out there available to do particular things, but it's actually sometimes telling the story in the right way. And perhaps we haven't been doing that, well, up to date, I don't really know, but you know, I think there's ways in which we can frame it that might be able to help us, you know, start to move in the right direction, pardon the pun.
Yeah, and two-way Friarsgate is one of the top 10 priorities that's being worked on at the moment in the movement strategy. And that's an example of how the two are working in synergy. And it was a very important conversation that we wanted to broker at the earliest stage, that the movement strategy understands the needs of Central Winchester, and that Central Winchester is understanding the wider perspective of the movement strategy. And that conversation, you know, as John puts it, we don't know what the answer is right now, but we know that we need to keep talking on a regular basis and find our way through, and make sure all the different bits within the city are moving in the same direction. Do we have any more questions? Kate.
Is that okay? Yeah. Martin, at the beginning of the evening, you spoke about opening a door, and I think that was a very appropriate expression. I can say, and I'm sure I speak for many, that I, after a lot of skepticism, will go away tonight with a sense of great hope. There's just one thing I would like not to, I don't expect an answer, but just to sow the seeds of a question. The fact that you're approaching this in this very open-minded way and talking about incremental approach and involving several architects to collaborate together, that's all welcome and will lead, I'm sure, to a rich variety. But we're now on the eve of the day of the announcement of the final IPCC report. So the elephant in the room and the biggest challenge facing not just us, not just the UK, but the world, is climate change. And you've spoken about batteries and photovoltaics and so on, but there are other sources of renewable energy and low carbon sources. Air source heat pumps are used for all developments now in Scandinavia, for God's sake, where they get minus 30 or less in the wintertime. And we're just on the very edge of really implementing these technologies. The site is adjacent to the river, and I'm sure that heat could be harvested out of the river, as indeed it is from the Thames, for instance, in London, for the Festival Hall and the National Theatre. So I would simply raise the plea that all of these alternative technologies are looked at, and looked at early, because if you're developing in an incremental way, there's going to have to be an overall strategy as far as those issues of infrastructure are concerned, which applies across the entire development site. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
I think Kate was saying she didn't need an answer, but what I can tell you is in all Igloo developments, you know, speak for us, is that we put air source heat pumps and so photovoltaics and batteries in every project. So we're there on the air source heat pump. I thought you were going to go into the embodied carbon point, which you mentioned before. So I think one of the things that came out of the terrible tragedy, which was Grenfell, was another terrible decision that the industry seemed to use it to attack timber. And actually not being able to use timber over a certain height is going to be a real problem for us as a society. However, here it's also a blessing because we don't want to build tall. So actually we also think there's a great opportunity here to build the majority of the dwellings in timber and therefore reduce the embodied carbon. So I think it's not just the energy side of it, I think it's also that embodied carbon side of it, and working in the I'm not going to do it because I did last night, the biosphere rather than the technical sphere. So we've got technological solutions, but there's also natural solutions, and we want to be growing buildings, and I think that's one of the ways in which we can do it.
I wasn't so much thinking about the carbon in the materials you're going to use, although that's very important. I was thinking about the carbon that's in the materials that are already here, the energy in those. And I mean, if you're seriously thinking of reusing this King's Walk thing, it should have been done decades ago. Even, honestly, I'd probably get booed, but even the brooks could be fixed. And the millions of tons, sharp intake of breath, millions of tons of embodied energy in that. And there's quite, I wouldn't demolish Friars Gate. That's about to go. That should have been the next surgery.
John, any more on? I know you love talking about embodied carbon, and I love.
Yeah, so we start with the materials we've got here. Completely agree. So I think we talked about that in the presentation. And I think I just wanted to extend that to then not looking always at man-made solutions. So in terms of technical solutions, so the energy side is really important, but actually form factor, thermal efficiency, fabric efficiency, etc., and the way we build in timber, etc., I think is equally important. So what we do, which is new, should be regenerative, not something which is actually storing up a future problem. So agree, let's use what we've got. There's a big material store here on site, and then what do we augment that with in order to move forwards? So completely agree.
Thank you, John. I think, okay, one last word.
With regard to the pollution in Friars Gate and further up St George's Street, many years ago when the fire station was still in its old position off of North Walls, I suggested that that piece of land be used to widen the exit from the street so that people from the car park going north of the city would be able to come out of the car park and come out there into the bottom of North Walls and put a roundabout there with traffic light control, and that would bring a lot of the traffic out of Winchester without having to go from car parks and everywhere else at the bottom of Winchester all the way up through the city and out. I was told that a meeting was going to be held. Well, I did, by chance, see the result of that meeting. A consultant was paid to come and give advice, and his solution was a roundabout at the bottom of North Walls. And the summing up at the meeting was, well, we'll sort of leave that to the committee or something like that. So nothing has ever been done.
It sounds like you may need a second career working for highways planning, because the plan for two-way traffic in Friars Gate, which would enable, part of the purpose of that is to allow the traffic to exit in both directions, either up Eastern Lane or over the bridge. In order to make that happen, you do need to redesign the junction at the bottom of North Walls and at Union Street. Is that right? Yeah. To enable that to happen. So actually, the difficult bit of making Friars Gate two-way is what you do with the traffic that goes back the other way, because the current layout isn't suitable to get the cars out in the appropriate direction, and that's being looked at the moment. It sounds like broadly we're doing what you suggested all these years ago. It's just taken the City Council and the County Council a few years to catch up with you. So anyway, so absolutely revisiting that area, that is part of the plan at the moment. I thank you everybody for all your questions. Thank you also for the real enthusiasm that you've shown towards the choice of Jigsaw as our partner. And thank you to our new partners, not just partners with the city, but partners with people in this room, with the people of Winchester, who are going to regenerate the centre of the city. And I hope you're as excited as I am about the choice that we've made, the partners that we have, and the future way forward that you saw laid out in front of you today. Thank you all very much indeed for coming along. And I look forward to working with you and with Jigsaw and the rest of the team for a fantastic regeneration of our city.